will find a home here and burrow away over the years. And of course, at this time of year, lots of small mammals will be looking for places to hibernate through the winter. But the real colour in the autumn comes from the toadstools and the fungi. I mean, just look at that. It really is beautiful. And it's just an essential part of the whole process of keeping a woodland healthy. Well, my country hedgerow mix has really done well. Look at this lot, over 8 feet tall. This is field maple. And although it's very tall, it's still very thin at the bottom. And I want to thicken it up. And this is a very good time to do that. It's just the very beginning of the growing season. It looks pretty devastating. What I'm actually doing is trimming the side shoots off and then sawing nearly all the way through the base so that I can bend these things over. Still leaving plenty of live wood on the back there, so the sap will keep flowing. Bending them over sort of encourages lots of side shoots from these sloping stems then, and the whole thing will get thicker and thicker, and it'll keep next door's cat out with a bit of luck. Well, I've certainly given that a bit of a fright, but it's amazing. Within a few days at this time of year, it's all going to start back into growth, and it'll soon be back up here again. I am going to leave the hawthorn another season or so, though, I think. It still leaves me with the twigs, of course, and in most gardens, this lot will be straight on a bonfire, but not in a wildlife garden. It is amazing how these trees have grown. That's the point that was the top of this silver birch when it was planted just 4 seasons ago. And look at it, enormous. It's grown 6 or 7 feet every year since it was planted. And you might think that they were very tightly planted together, far too thickly, if you like. But look at this, it's amazing. That little birch tree was planted at just the same size and the same time, but it hasn't done so well, and now the big ones are starting to crowd out the little ones, so there really isn't any need to go in and saw these ones down. But it is important that some sunshine gets through to the woodland floor so the flowers will grow. Remember, it's down at the leaf litter level that the woodland habitat really buzzes, and you can enjoy the pleasure of a carpet of beautiful wildflowers each spring. But as usual, you need to begin with the right preparation. Well, I'm planting nothing but native wildflowers in this bit of the edge of woodland, and so for the last 6 or 7 months I've been collecting them together. Some of these plants I've grown from seed that I've collected, others are seedlings that have appeared in the garden that I've dug up, and yet more I've grown from seeds that I've bought in packets. The most important thing to remember is you mustn't go out into the countryside and dig wild plants up. There really isn't any need anyway. Lots of these things you can buy in garden centres, and there are dozens and dozens of species that are available from seed merchants these days as well. The things that I've got here are huge cabbage-sized foxgloves that have been transplanted in the garden for a few months. And then I've got greater celandine from seed that I collected this summer. I've got some primroses, which are seedlings. They naturalise all over this sandy soil, so I've been able to dig them up and put them into pots. And some snowdrops that I planted up when I realised I was going to be too late in the autumn. and just a few bluebell bulbs from somebody else's garden. And of course, this is the spare soil that came out of the hole when I dug the pond. These are all wildflowers of the woodland edge, and you can see how well they're doing in the dappled light where the sunshine does just manage to get through. But down here, it's very dark and gloomy in the summer because this big hazel has just outgrown itself. So I'm just going to go in and chop one or two of the main branches out. Well, I'll take 3 or 4 branches out of this particular bush, and they'll join the hedge trimmings, because in this garden there's an endless need for more little piles of logs, little piles of twigs, as habitat for a whole range of wildlife. You can see over here, these big dead logs were put in here only 4 years ago, and they've been chewed and eaten and gnawed away until they're really quite rotten. It seems a bit unfair to disturb them, but if I split this log, I think you'll see it's crawling with wildlife. Look at these great big podgy white grubs. I've discovered they're the larvae of the lesser stag beetle. Now they're out in the open, they'll be snapped up in no time by a robin or a blackbird. But obviously, it's important to leave most of them undisturbed. Otherwise, there'll be none of these handsome adults in a year or two's time, keeping up the good work. I realise beetles and creepy crawlies aren't everybody's idea of wonderful wildlife. If you had creatures a bit bigger and more glamorous in mind, then it's quite possible to build a home for them too. I think the real secret of creating mini habitats in a wildlife garden is to think yourself down to the scale of a wood mouse or a wren or a weasel, and then think about where you'd like to live. And what I'm doing is creating the sort of hidey holes that that sort of creature likes to hide away in or to hunt through. There were piles of stones all around this garden, and particularly lots of stones in a bed in the middle of the lawn full of conifers. And they've just been, you know, wasted until now. What I'm doing is building a simple sort of circle of dry stone wall and then filling it in with rubble. Really, I'm just providing a big pile of holes and tunnels. And of course, building holes is terribly hard work, but at least it keeps you warm in the winter. By the time high summer arrives, the woodland edge is so dense you can't see through to the edge of the garden, and that's exactly the effect I wanted. You can keep tinkering with this kind of habitat forever, of course. There's a lovely colony of raspberries that's moved in here, and the blackbirds just love the fruit in the autumn. And here's my dry stone tump. You can hardly see it for all the plants that have grown over it. No weasels yet, though. And then the foxgloves have colonised this whole area, so they fill this patch with flowers every summer. And after 5 years, I'm really pleased to say that I've got a lovely honeysuckle that's growing right up through the silver birch there. It's marvellous for moths in the evening, and it fills the garden with perfume. You'll know your woodland habitat's a success if the local birds approve. We get lots of different species now, but to keep them all happy, you have to make sure there's a good supply of food the whole year round. In early spring, the blue tits come to feed in the treetops, what you might call the ballet of the birch buds. Later in the spring, when there are chicks to feed, there's no shortage of caterpillars because I never use insecticides in the garden. Towards the end of summer, the birds start to feed on berries. I grow a whole range of fruit-bearing shrubs. At first, the local resident birds have the crop to themselves. But once the cold weather arrives, it brings competition from foreign visitors, like these redwings from the far north of Scandinavia. We always leave lots of windfalls under the apple tree, and all kinds of birds peck away at them from morning till night. This handsome specimen is a fieldfare, probably travelled over on the same flight as the redwings. I try to make sure there's always a bag of peanuts hanging up through the winter. For this female siskin, it must be a lifesaver after her long journey down from the frozen north. The locals like them too. But the basic life support system for my winter garden birds is right outside my window, where I can keep an eye on the pecking order. It's lovely to watch the sparrows and finches forming an orderly queue for the bird table. They come every day, regular as clockwork, and they fly in from the whole surrounding neighbourhood. So once you start feeding, please don't stop. They're depending on you, and you mustn't let them down or they'll starve.
Now, it's all very well inviting all these rare and exotic birds into your garden, but that does mean you've got really quite a responsibility towards them. So I have a policy in this garden of no pesticides, no herbicides. And a lot of people would think, well, that means, of course, he can't grow his own vegetables. But in fact, I have a very nice vegetable garden down at the end. And one of the secrets with gardening organically is that you've really got to feed the soil. So all of the organic material, all the vegetable waste, the old avocado skins, the banana peels that come out of the house go straight onto the compost heap. And the amazing thing is that if you cover it over and you just get plenty of air into it, within 3 or 4 months, you've turned it into this wonderful, crumbly compost. And that's the perfect material to spread onto the vegetable patch, put the fertility back into the soil and grow another lot of vegetables to put back on the compost heap. All that compost really does build up the fertility in the soil. And by the middle of the summer, it's hardly recognisable, just so much growth. And I particularly like growing different kinds of vegetables side by side. They do seem to protect one another in some magical kind of way. So I've got a nice crop of juicy young broad beans down there growing right beside a nice open green lettuce. And there's a very healthy patch of bronze-leaved lettuce over there. The birds really do seem to leave that alone. And it's growing right beside a big patch of spinach, a few holes in the leaves, but not very many. And then growing right up through the middle of it, there's even a potato plant. And to attract even more insects, I always plant lots of flowers in amongst the vegetables. Borage, for instance, is a marvellous bee plant, and those bees help to pollinate quite a lot of the crops. And then I grow French marigolds because that brings in the hoverflies, and they're just one of the insects that helps to control the black fly and the green fly.
As far as I'm concerned, it's down at the detailed level that garden wildlife really gets exciting. Just amazing creatures, and we really don't know much about them. Most gardeners spend more on chemicals each year than they do on anything else. And it's not till you dig a patch of the garden or turn over a bit of dead wood that you realise just how much damage these poisons can do. It's so easy to kill everything. Try keeping chemicals out of your garden for a season, and I promise you'll notice the difference. You'll actually have lots of ladybirds to munch up the greenfly for you. It's these creepy crawlies that chew up the dead leaves, aerate the soil, and keep the garden healthy. And don't forget, they're the food for many of the more spectacular creatures too. Blue tits might like peanuts through the winter, but the baby birds must have caterpillars to eat in the early spring. Everything in the garden depends on everything else, and it's your job to make sure you don't upset the balance of nature too much. Slugs and fungi might not be the glamorous end of nature conservation, but it's worth remembering that they are a very, very important part of the whole food web. Don't let all my enthusiasm for mini wildlife habitats put you off. I haven't forgotten that first and foremost, this is a garden. And even if you've only got a hanging basket or a window box, one thing you can do is choose garden flowers that are going to be particularly attractive to bees and butterflies. That's what I've done here. A couple of years ago, I knocked down a very ugly greenhouse, and I've created a sort of cottage garden close to the house. It gives me a great deal of pleasure. It's full of colour from very early in the spring to late autumn, and it provides a constant supply of pollen and nectar for the insects. So this isn't a wilderness. I haven't just abandoned my back garden to the weeds and the creepy crawlies. It is a great place for wildlife, but the smashing thing is it's a marvellous garden for people too.